Farming food and fashion for a discerning world is serious business in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are new opportunities everywhere just waiting for the open-minded. Sarah's Country shines a light on the matters that matter most. And here's your host, Sarah Perriam.
Kia ora and welcome to Sarah's Country for another week in our Opinion Maker show. Do you think it's possible to move the New Zealand farming industry away from capital gain and redefine value? It will involve restructuring the organisations that can capture it. Also, is it possible to move away from status quo to game-changing, innovation-led farming and growing? We will have to deal with the systemic silos across leadership, research and data management. Well, are we ready for purpose-driven leadership that's happy to prioritise the people it serves over themselves? It was an interesting crossroads, I felt, at this year's field days last week, and if you were there, maybe you picked up on the same vibe. It was one of positive optimism. Of course, we've got a rewarding dairy price payer at the moment, but of course, an air of scepticism, and no wonder with continued uncertainty and pressure on what this new world and of farming, food and fashion in Aotearoa, New Zealand is going to look like into the future. I mean, certainly there's a hell of a lot of people trying to work it out. For those who are new to tuning into our weekly online TV show, Sarah's Country, I'm your host, Sarah Perriam. Welcome. You may find comfort in knowing there's thousands more tuning in on podcasts to realise that we're all in this together. We're not alone. And boy, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take brave leadership. We're going to have to self-disrupt age-old structures built 150 years ago that was here to service an industry that was really more focused on frozen lamb on a boat to England. And it's not really going to be fit for purpose for the next 150 years. There is a battle of ideas out there on how to transform the sector in our country that relies so heavily economically on how we grow and distribute food and fibre. But there's so much of it that's broken and not serving the very farmer that has the most to risk. The people that question and ultimately change anything in this world can be leaders at every level, and change doesn't come until a compelling alternative is offered. On this show, we are going to be working through the 5 pillars fundamental to a thriving New Zealand food and fibre sector. I have it here in my hands from a year of research from both the 2020 and 2021 Nuffield Scholars. It's titled Dead Ends or Transformation, Redesigning New Zealand Farming to Thrive Through Change. They turned the challenge of not being able to travel overseas for their scholarship year due to COVID and put it to great use to create this insight report and a tour of New Zealand. Now, these 5 pillars will be unpacked throughout the rest of the show with our 3 scholars that will be on our panel to discuss topics I love to get into right here daily on Sarah's Country. But they have so beautifully packaged them up into this report. You can get a link to download the report wherever you are listening or watching, or head to sarahscountry.com. Well, now it's time to meet our Nuffield Scholars and our panellists on our Opinion Maker show. And I'm going to start with Shannon Harnett, who is a 2020 Nuffield Scholar. Shannon has experience in dairy, sheep and beef and horticulture, holding senior management and accounting roles before becoming a director at Rural Accountants. She's been involved in several horticultural startup businesses dealing with PVA varieties, and Shannon's a chartered accountant as well as director and co-owner, as I said, of Rural Accountants in Whakatane, a member of the Institute of Directors, and holds directorships in several agricultural and horticultural businesses. Growing up on a sheep and beef farm in Hawke's Bay as well, Shannon's farming business background has guided her accounting career by starting straight out of school into a farm accountancy practices, and she's a part of our panel. Shannon, what was it that led you to join a Nuffield Scholarship and take down this path?
Well, I think, Sarah, I've always been really interested in it. And it was just serendipitous. One day I was at a conference and I happened to sit next to a Nuffield alumni that I knew. And we started talking about Nuffield. And he said, you know what, give it a crack. So I did, with the expectation of going overseas for 18 weeks and building my international networks. But sadly, that was not to be. We got 1 week in Australia, but look, the experience we've had around New Zealand has just been fantastic. So I certainly don't feel like I've missed out on the international piece.
Wonderful. And we're going to get into the 2021 Nuffield Insight reports later around why and how this unfolded due to COVID. But now David Eade and his wife own a finishing block in Wanganui where they're focused on building ecological equity and high quality produce through regenerative practices. David's also the general manager for Apri Solutions, an early stage technology company intent on unlocking the potential of bees. Having been raised on a Hereford stud in North Waikato, David and his young family have recently returned to Aotearoa after spending the last 6 years building teams and products in San Francisco's technology world. David, what an interesting journey to come back from that experience in San Francisco, in that world, and then to see how potentially far behind the New Zealand agricultural sector may be, but also the opportunities. What led you down the path of a Nuffield Scholarship?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the intro. For me, we've gone full circle. So we obviously, as you said, were raised on a sheep and beef farm. And at the time, we spread our wings and shot off overseas, only to come back and get into the sector for the right reasons. It was probably an epiphany when overseas that realizing that all of the change going on, farming has one of the biggest roles to play in making the world a better place. So for us, it was a slow step towards coming home. Completed a Kellogg program 3 years ago with the intention of integrating back into the sector. And, I've always been passionate about trying to make change in the sector, and a Nuffield Scholarship feels like a great place to do it, hence why applying and giving it a go.
David, 2021 scholar, as well as our third panellist, Daniel Ebb, who comes from a family of beef finishing in Northland and is the director of Dirt Road Comms in Auckland. Dirt Road Comms was established to support those building a more regenerative food system in New Zealand. Dan's a founder of Open Farms, the New Zealand's nationwide all-sector open farm day that reconnects urban Kiwis with our land, our farmers and our food. He's also a media contributor and the host of the Why We Grow Show podcast, as well as a well-known industry speaker. Daniel, one that is not actively farming, but that is certainly doesn't stop you from going down the path of a Nuffield Scholarship, and your reasonings behind it are just as exciting and inspirational. Can you explain why Nuffield was the pathway forward to progress your ideas?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity to prioritise learning and research. As a lot of other farmers and as many other Kiwis will know, that often you're in sort of the day-to-day making money, building clients, that kind of thing. And it was quite clear to me that, similar to David, I want to make a positive impact in the sector. And to do that, I need to get down in the weeds for a good 6 months a year and learn about what the problems that our farmers and our customers are facing.
It's an absolutely huge undertaking. As Shannon, you said there, 18 weeks overseas, the time out of your day-to-day businesses to do a Nuffield Scholarship is extremely aspirational. But, when you get to that certain point where you do want to contribute and make a difference, we're talking around the Nuffield report I have here, the Dead Ends or Transformation, Redesigning New Zealand Farming to Thrive Through Change, which, of course, the link is in the description below for you to be able to read through. And it has been a culmination of COVID interrupting that amazing opportunity to head around the world that Nuffield Scholars do every year. Shannon, what was the pathway of a world tour of New Zealand coming together of two scholarship groups to create this incredible insight report? What was the desire to be able to continue to do that study and maximise your scholarship experience and not let COVID get in the way of that?
Okay, well, I'll start at the beginning, Sarah. And really, it was 74 years ago, William Morris, who's Lord Nuffield, a philanthropist from the UK, started the Nuffield Scholarship. And it was to recognise agriculture's contribution to feeding the British Empire during World War II. And in effect, what they wanted to do was send British agriculturalist farmers overseas to bring back information. And so they could, the British farming system could reap the rewards. Now this has spread out throughout the world, and New Zealand's in its 71st year of providing Nuffield scholarships. Now we really had to change the game. So as I said, one weekend we were brought back to New Zealand, and I think there was a lot of soul searching and a redefining of the Nuffield scholarship process. And really, it was clear to us as the 2020 scholars that it wasn't so much about travelling overseas, but being able to step up into leadership positions and create insight and foresight. So what we did was the 2021s and the 2020 Nuffield Scholars worked together, first time in the 71 years, and we travelled the length and breadth of New Zealand. Most of the New Zealand scholars before us didn't get this opportunity because they were out travelling the world. So what we did was we met with leaders in and out of the primary sector. We saw people from high country farmers to high performance rowing New Zealand. It was quite a big spread. And we were able to gauge the opportunities and challenges that face the New Zealand food and fibre sector, and what will be coming in the next few years. So we did this New Zealand tour in February and March of this year, and we travelled over 3,200 kilometres. We made, the 2020s made 71 visits, and the 2021 67 visits. They were shut down for a day or two with COVID. Luckily, there was no COVID within the group, obviously. And then we came together with other Nuffield alumni, and we had some insight development sessions. Now, the 2020 scholars had presented a report, and this report really built on the principles that we raised last year, and I'll just quickly touch on those. So this report was done during COVID. We were sort of in and out of lockdown. Auckland was in and out of lockdown. So the 2020 scholars last year interviewed around 60 leaders, and we came up with 4 major insights, which at the time were relevant. They were resilient supply chains that we have here in New Zealand to keep our industries going, the rise of the have-nots, which is an increasing issue, the need for fit-for-purpose leadership, and the moving New Zealand farming from volume to value to values, which has come out really strong in this report as well. So I think that covers that, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Shannon. That's a fantastic way to set the scene on how we've landed here with the Primary Sector Insights Report 2021, unpacking with the panellists. The first thing, when we see a rising acceleration of change, to be able to frame that up in a way of how we cope with transformation. David, why did you decide as a group to go down the path of Bill Sharp's 3 Horizons growth model to explain how the difference of sticking with business as usual as opposed to setting ourselves up for the disruptive innovation coming out our sector, and the fundamentals of that growth model and the Horizons element with flips? Could you explain the concept of how that framework saw out the rest of this report?
Yeah, sure. So it's a nice model when you unpack it. So I'm sure if you look at the report, you can see it in a visual sense, but you've basically got these three horizons. So you've got Horizon 1, which is our current state, and it's the state which we keep following. We're going to hit a rapid decline. We've got Horizon 3, which is the far off future, and it's the early signals of which we're seeing now that are taking place. And then we've got these two horizons in the middle, or one horizon, H2, which is basically the parachute that's going to take us from our current state to the future state. So when driving out the country and looking at businesses, we saw, well, businesses, producers, everyone, we picked up on the early signals of what our consumers, stakeholders, and supply chains are seeking for what Horizon 3 is looking like. And we're seeing the parts of Horizon 1 which we want to hold on to and which are good. And then we're trying to identify which, or where in the middle we have to play to identify the right businesses that are taking us towards the positive horizon. One thing to be mindful here is there's a getting a little bit technical, but an H2 negative, which is holding on to the current state by providing a form of innovation. So these are the ones that are prolonging a negative future that we currently have. So we're trying to move away from those and get into a H2 positive state. Why this model worked well for us and the flips, it's easy to identify what we're doing currently and the flip we need to do to get to the future state. And that's what the report has been based around.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that nice common middle ground to be able to take us forward. Daniel, Eb, the 5 parts that were broken down, incentives, innovation, people, silos and leadership, how you broke up this report, all focusing around how we can disrupt our industry, but as David said there, hold on to what is dear to us at the same time. How did the 5 groups endeavour to follow the growth model of Bill Sharp, the Horizons growth model, but focus on those 5 areas?
So the 5 pillars came about quite organically. We sat down for our final insight session in Invercargill, and we could see that there were a handful of sort of key buckets or pillars that sort of shaped up this process of change that we keep talking about, this H2 positive change, and then supporting that was sort of our natural inclinations as scholars, and we fell quite cleanly into these 5 buckets. So you'll see that there's 2 scholars per pillar. And it just kind of made sense and felt right, so we went with it. I don't know if that's a scholarly thing to say, but sometimes you just got to go with the vibe of the thing.
I'm loving these 5 pillars. Shannon, I'm going to start with your one that you did with Ben McLaughlin around innovation, because obviously disruption and transformation, we obviously associate very clearly with the innovation of how we produce our products and deliver them into market. What I really enjoyed is it's similar to the concept of that we used to think that the Earth was at the centre of the universe until we discovered that it was the sun. To me, it's like we have discovered that the consumer should be at the absolute centre of what we do, and our innovation matrix that you've laid out here, to find the right way path. Can you explain how yourself and Ben just, laid out these flips that, so to speak, of how we can flip from the old status quo to the future?
Okay. The innovation piece was really interesting. We grappled with innovation and adaptability, and then we realised, well, actually, they're very, very similar things. So we just lumped it all into the innovation piece. And I think you'll get from reading this report, change is coming. Change is here, really. We need to do something, and there's some pretty big gnarly issues we've got going on. We've got climate change, water, the growing consumer voices around sustainability, etc., which the others will also talk about. So what we did is we came up with 4 people that we saw throughout or 4 personas we saw throughout our travels. Now, the first one we called Steady Eddie. Now, this farmer is they just keep doing what they're doing, right? They're just all into just. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And really, the way to get those people to change generally is if their mates are doing it, or through regulation. Then the next person we had, so that's low risk and low uncertainty for the time being, low innovation and low adaptability. Then the next person was our progressive Pete, and Dave talked about the H2 negative. And this, so what Progressive Pete does is he is, or she, they're optimizing the model. So they're optimizing the current model to get as much as possible out of it. So chances are that model may not be even reliable anymore. The next is the H2 positive. We're calling them Risky Rick. And they're changing the model to utilise innovation. Now, a really good example of this we saw was an innovation that's come out of Plant and Food Research called FOPS, which is a new way of growing apples that will reduce the labour input and increase the ability for robotics. Then the fourth one, high innovation, high adaptability, high change, high risk, is Entrepreneurial Elizabeth, and that's completely changing the game. A great example of that is Rocket Apple, a company that I hold dear, and they completely changed the game on apples with the way they've set up their PVRs, but also the bringing in marketing, branding an apple in a time, a small apple, a miniature apple, when big apples were all the rage. So those are our four personas. The flips that come from them are moving from a finite mindset to an infinite mindset. That was taken from Simon Sinek, his book. And the next one was, rather than focusing on production, focusing on the consumer. And this was an insight that flows throughout this report. And the next one is, rather than optimizing the current model, transforming the model to make it work in the future, and ticking those really big boxes of consumer preference, environmental impact. Yeah, so that was innovation.
And it's interesting, a natural lead on to you, David, is that, the adaptability of a new model comes around the assessment of risk and however you see yourself on that persona matrix. But it really also is intrinsically linked with incentives as well. The incentive to move and the security around that incentive being there for a long enough period of time to uptake new technology or delve into full transformation of our business model. We talk about, the farming model of conscious consumers that are driven to purchase on our environmental credentials, but they're not quite there yet. So what did yourself and Ben Anderson, who was under the incentive pillar, find that we can start to really make transformational flips that will move farmers to adapt and change?
Yeah, so I guess when stripping it back, the first thing that we saw when driving around New Zealand, and we've known for a while, is that a lot of our current farming models have sort of reached a lot of seams, whether that be environmentally, whether that be with local stakeholders, or whether it be with consumers, and even the economic outcomes for farmers, if we really take a hard look at it, probably aren't there. So, when we're going through it, we look and see that farmers buy retail, sell wholesale, and have the most risk capital on the line. So I think there is a natural incentive to look for a better model. And then we see some great examples of how you've got this current standoff between what farmers view the conscious consumer as, and it's sometimes in a negative light because they're quick to criticize, but really it's the biggest key we have to unlocking additional value. And so seeing some positive outcomes and flips, there's three that I'd like to touch on quickly. So it's business to distributor supply chains, or from business and distributor supply chains to customer-led supply chains. Great example of this is Wakatu. They're co-developing with their customers and having products that basically flip what we believe to be food onto its side, and they're selling health and wellness, which is, a great way to reposition our food story. Being 2 years behind the consumer to the day of, Atkins Ranch gets close to the consumer by having a secondary processing plant in San Francisco. So instead of shipping carcasses abroad, we're finding cuts to meet the market on the day of. And, thirdly, it's going from supply chains to ecosystems. A great example of this was put nicely by Gallagher when asked, what do you define as product market fit? And it's when everyone in the supply chain is deeply happy. So I think all of these combine to try and address the fear that farmers currently have. And I guess the fear that we're hearing a lot is that, this current environmental regulation that is out there is a cost, and this cost is going to cripple my low margin business. So I think these are the first steps that we have towards, incentivizing farmers to change from the conscious consumer back.
Yeah, Daniel, to have a transformation in how we incentivise our farmers needs transformational leadership. You've stated here in the pillar around leadership that you co-authored with Tracy Brown that we're in a time of social licence crisis and time for very brave and bold leadership to understand that we are now operating in a completely different ecosystem whereby we need to be ahead of the consumer. What were your findings with Tracy and some of those flips that you suggest?
Yeah, I think there were two real key ones. One was about building into our leadership capability and styles a focus on the needs of others. So whether that's becoming really, really adept at being close to your customer. I mean, we've already mentioned Whakatu, but they're an excellent example of partnering with someone with a partner in market, in this case Japan, who deeply understood the customer and then building back through the supply chain based on that understanding. They're making products specifically for the needs of customers, not because we've just made these products for 150 years. So that's the flip. Do what my customer asks, not what I'm good at. Stop caring about what's important to me, start caring about what's important to my customer. Now there's a second part to that which is also really important. That's around social license. We're really good at focusing on the things that are important to us. Production. Social license works when you actually deprioritize your own needs and prioritize the needs of others. So the example we used is your average Kiwi mum in the street has this understanding that agriculture is really important to New Zealand, but her problem is not our GDP. Her problem is accessing healthy whole food and feeling good about the environment in which she lives in. So if we optimize our leadership and decision making for those needs rather than let's make more bucks, we're actually going to fix social license. That's the core of the social license issue. So it's redefining, it's flipping leadership from our needs to other needs, defining our purpose based on others. The second one, which I'll very briefly touch on, was the massive opportunity to use food and farming as quite a valuable force for good in society. You start seeing it with things like community gardens where communities are coming back together based on food as a driver. That's a massive opportunity to fix social license, to recruit new farmers, to add intangible value layers to our products that we sell, to create a healthy food culture in New Zealand. 1 in 5 Kiwi kids live in food insecurity, and we want to tell a story about health. We've got to acknowledge food's ability to connect and be a really valuable force for society, and that's a massive opportunity.
The idea of being purpose orientated in food as a force for good is absolutely incredible. Now, of course, as Daniel said there earlier, there is 5 pillars and we have 3 on our panel today. But Daniel, I'm going to actually just kick it off with you because I love that line around deprioritising what's in it for us and prioritising the good for others. But the thing is that our models within the way that our industry is structured is to optimize it to what we've created, as opposed to having complete and utter disruption to those silos, which is one of the pillars that is so deeply entrenched in our sector. how do we have transformational leadership when we are so forced into our silos?
So this was work from Phil Weir and John Foley, and it's really fundamental, I think, to understanding the landscape, because we've spent 150 years building silos that were really efficient, whether that was in terms of leadership. So we have beef and lamb for sheep and beef, we've got dairy and for dairy and NZ. We've restructured our leadership silos based on commodity, which when we start thinking about things like diversified farms or going to market altogether under a brand New Zealand, is that model necessarily fit for purpose in a world where we have to be deeply connected to customers, where we need to collaborate deeply as well? So the first silo was talking around leadership. The second silo was around science funding. This is John Foley's particular passion area. We saw a lot of really great work happening along on the tour, but whether that research is, again, connecting with customer need or connecting with other research that's happening or connecting with prior research, there's a lot of good stuff happening, but it's all happening, shock horror, in silo. Is an emerging silo, which is data. And this kind of goes back to the leadership piece. What we see a lot of existing organizations in the space doing is holding on to data, either A, not capturing enough of it or not prioritizing the capture of data, or B, capturing data and then holding on to it in the hope that in 5-10 years when the system fits, they'll be able to extract some value out of that. Data only has value when you can partner with people who can use it. And so again, this necessitates actively going out and finding partners for whom this data will be valuable and then sharing the rewards. Again, it links to leadership as well.
Yeah, and David, I'd love to hear your thoughts, having lived in the technology world in San Francisco and the siloed structure of our industry, to be able to have diverse landscapes and farms like you are with your own family in Wanganui, but also to being able to share data. This must seem ludicrous from you working in completely separate country and separate industry to come back into. Is there solutions throughout this work that you can see emerging?
Yeah, I definitely think there are. I think it's, what you see globally in some of the business models that data rely on is, who owns the data is probably one of the places we need to start. I think right now we're building, or a lot of companies or sectors are building products in isolation with the intention of holding on to that data. If we could free it up in a way where farmers or producers actually hold the data and have the value in the data and are willing to share it cross-sector, I think that's a good starting point to give control to the farmer. They're the ones generating the data, and they should hold on to the value of it. I think it's not too far before we have a good cross-sector working relationship. I think it's, whether it be through natural attrition or just growth, we're going to get to a point where it'll work.
Shannon, the last pillar that we need to discuss, Lindsay Stratford and Ed Pinkney on people. I mean, you've been involved in horticultural startup businesses and seen many of your clients, I could imagine, from rural accountants, involved in the absolute struggle around retention and the ability to empower rather than hold power, I find is an interesting flip here in the sector. Could you please explain the work of Lindsay and Ed on their behalf?
Yes, certainly. I think it's the people piece is just so important. And as we went around New Zealand, you could see there was a definite difference between the entities that really valued their people and the others that valued labour. So, I think that's a really, really big difference. So moving from a labour unit, a resource, to an actual person, it just makes sense, right? But another point Lindsay and Ed picked up on was the a word that Aora Whakatu used, and they call it intrapreneurship rather than entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is giving people the ability to create and innovate within a team. So acting as entrepreneurs, as people in the team. And this is like it's the results are just fantastic. Outcomes, like you get the business retains the best people because people are purpose driven, and they also, and you get to tap into their discretionary effort and diverse thinking. Far much more engagement, and Andy Elliott at Whakatu really just personified that. But and you also, of course, get the customer benefit from the products and solutions that are at the forefront of innovation. Another flip they had was was to empower, and I guess this does lead into the entrepreneurship, is just empowering people rather than holding the power. And I think we're seeing this through a lot of business places. And not just farming, it's certainly happening in accounting as well, which is just great because the traditional worker model, I mean, people are just not putting up with it anymore, especially with such low unemployment rates. So it's just a great thing to see.
So we have several scenarios and models for transformation. The scary part of the title of Dead Ends, or A Time for Transformation and Redesigning, is the fact that we've actually allowed ourselves to get to absolute crisis point in so many factors across our food and fibre sector to actually enact change. And I don't know if we're going to take these learnings forward. And I really, really definitely hope that we can. I'd love to just have a general discussion with the three of you. I really want to open it up to what really, really frustrates you that is such low-hanging fruit. Daniel, I'll start with you. I mean, it's to reading this, it seems so straightforward, but so hard.
Yeah, I suppose there's two pieces to that. If we talk about low-hanging fruit, my research topic is going to focus on redesigning our local food system. As I mentioned, 1 in 5 Kiwi kids live in food insecurity, and we are depending on who you talk to, the third or the second most obese nation in the world. I'm a marketing person. If we try and sell a marketing story around health and sustainability and goodness, it's just completely inauthentic. So we've failed to even get to the starting line if we want to add intangible value. So to me, that's not just low-hanging fruit, that's arguably the biggest risk and also the biggest opportunity if we can create this kind of culture of goodness and culture of health that we then get an economic return on because we export the best food to the world. It's the same reason why you spend 10 grand more on a BMW versus a Toyota, because it's made by the Germans, and Germans just really good at engineering. We should be really good at health and really good at farming. I think low-hanging fruit is prioritize the needs of others in our society, then the needs of customers, because that's how we'll solve our social license issues, and that's how we'll build a story that we can then export to the world. And then from an innovation perspective, look to the edges. As innovation is happening, but it's the small, nimble organisations that will bring it to the forefront.
David, it's a really interesting thing, and it's in your field around incentives. You've got our industry good models. We know how they're financed from levies. We know how they're governed in terms of appointments to those boards. But you also have where we can make exponential change, which is in our suppliers and our processes. We know how they're incentivised and how they're governed. So if we start to understand that, will that mean that we can lead to transformation through a level of incentive that flows down to make those big changes on farm?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to pass value on to the people with the most risk on the line. And I guess that is your farmer in a lot of instances. So it's creating these, you look across the value or supply chain, and there's these pockets of profit that need to be distributed evenly for people to continue what they're doing and producing good food. I think, right now you look around and, the analogy you liken it to is that we've been asked to go on a diet as food producers, and it's an environmental diet. And, some of us can see what the outcome is and we want to look good for summer, and others, the beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and we're sitting there saying we already look great. So there's this mental shift that we need to go through, and we agree on 90% of things, and it's this last 10% that seems to be catching us out. And I think, there's a lot of good success stories out there right now where people have just got on and done it. And, these stories are being told in isolation and probably in the farming community. And I think, so when you talk about low-hanging fruit, I think there's an easy way to spin the narrative to have the primary sector describe what it is they do. We heard a great example, instead of fighting over the GDP that the dairy sector brings to New Zealand, it was simply put that, the dairy sector is responsible for keeping the schools and hospitals running 1 day per week. It's outcome-based, it's great. It's an easy story to tell and it's positive. The more we can tell these stories, I think it's, you get this, you get a better perception about farming, you get people wanting to get into the sector. And then I think it's much easier to create these, the profit pools to spill evenly across the supply chain when we're all deeply happy about what it is we do.
How good is that? The thing is that farming in New Zealand at the moment, it feels like getting fit for summer. We've got a really nasty drill coach who is just not letting up in regards to drop it and give us 20 as opposed to understanding and work with us about the outcome of what we're trying to achieve. It makes it a very hard environment to operate and keep positive about. And actually, Shannon, with your work with innovation, if we're in a state of sort of short-termism and our confidence is so low because of the rhetoric that's happening around farming, we're not even in the mindset to even want to go down and take on risk when we're in that state. So therefore, how do we shift that along your persona matrix of that adaptability when we are so fatigued at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sarah. And it's there's so much government funding out there for innovation that doesn't seem to be getting out into our networks. So the uptake is quite small. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the regional business network that runs out of NZTE. There's a lot of funding there for doing strategic plans, doing a range of business initiatives. Then the bigger ones, the New Zealand, the Sustainable Farming Fund still has a lot of resource there. So does Callaghan. NZTE is such a huge support to our export businesses. I know at Rocket they really relied on them a lot, and they're just a fantastic organisation, along with the umbrella of MB. So there is a lot of support out there, and I think we need to be talking about it a little bit more and utilising this funding available to us to just give us the push.
Yeah, well, I want to round it out with a push from each of you, and I want you to come in and sort of smack it for 6 to close, of some hard-hitting call to action. Imagine who you've got, you want to deliver this message to in your head. You don't have to tell us, but to stand up and take action today. Daniel, Eve, I'll start with you again. To those people that really need to understand that we have hit a dead end if we do not change.
Yeah, the only constant for survival is change. If you're not undergoing change, you are almost slowly dying. I've heard analogies before of great businesses are like dragons or snakes. They're constantly shedding their skin into something new. And so I think we talk about don't rest on our laurels. If I'm honest, I think as a sector we've done that because we are exceptionally good at what we do. But at the same time, we need to have the courage to disrupt our own business models. Whether you're an individual farmer who's been selling to the same processor for the last 30 years, you've got to recognize that there's a risk in that. And at the same time, there's all these opportunities out there. If you zoom back and actually think of who is my customer or who could my customer be, zoom back out of your business. Acknowledge that innovation and change has to happen in every business and every sector. So what is your slice of change? What does change look like to you? And probably talk to your family first, because those are the people who are going to be carrying through that change, for the long run.
So good. David?
My message. My message is, I know we hear a lot about, flipping this into an opportunity, but I do believe, and when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about our current state of being forced to change. I do see it as a big opportunity, and it's an opportunity to redefine what it is we do, what we hold dear as farmers and all food producers in New Zealand, and what we hold dear as a nation. So I think, it's time to be empathetic, put on the hat of, being curious. I think it's going out there, it's, deeply understanding someone's struggle, whether that be the consumer, the stakeholder, other farmers around you in your community. I think it's seeking the divergent perspective. So, strong opinions held loosely, but let's go out and test our assumptions. And then I think it's taking principled risk once we know that. I think, with a rough formula, we can all make small amounts of change that are going to add up pretty quick.
And Shannon, we started with you, and what a wonderful way to end as well.
Thanks. I think on an individual level, we need to make decisions based on integrity. And when I think about integrity, I think of doing what's right, not what's fun, fast, or easy. And to be values-based and move into this values-based model that we are moving into, whether we like it or not, we need to make decisions based on the right thing to do, whether that's re-looking at how we treat our teams and our people, or what we're growing on our land. And whether it's the right thing to do. I think it's, there is change coming, and I can see how it could be really scary, but I really do think there is huge opportunity for us as New Zealanders, and I'm excited to be part of our agricultural industry, our primary sector.
Thank you so much to all three of you for your time. Daniel Ebb, David Eade and Shannon Harnett joining us here as 2020 and 2021 Nuffield Farming Scholars. Thank you again so much. What an absolute privilege to catch up with Daniel, Shannon and David, 2020 and 2021 Nuffield Scholars. And they assure me that this report is only the beginning of where their research will take them. I want to leave you on this part from the leadership section. We need a new breed of leader committed not to patch protection and simply mitigating challenges, but to redesign our systems for resilience in the face of crisis. And I certainly believe that our Nuffield Scholars are the leaders of the future. So did right back in 1974 when William Morris, Lord Nuffield, 1947, my apologies, created Nuffield as a process to create insights and foresights for farming globally. So of course, as I said, the report will be in the description wherever you are listening or watching to this, as well as cerescountry.com, not only for this episode to be able to watch back on demand, but also too for all of our shows daily, dropping on podcast. Opinion makers on Tuesdays, and lots of change makers, inspiring change makers across Aotearoa New Zealand. And there we, a corner of the world, being a cog forward in this transformation we've been discussing here on this Opinion Maker show. If you do want to reach out to me with any ideas on the challenges we're facing in some of the parts of the sector where we could dive deep in over an hour, please get in touch. Sarah@cerescountry.com. And of course, you can subscribe to the Ceres Country Club, so you can email on all of the content that you that is coming up in advance, as all the things that you may have missed, to keep you in the know on the matters that matter most. It's been a pleasure being with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Haere rā.